Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to you all for the interactive talk on conversations around Sci-Art, organized by the Microbiological Society, St. Joseph's College, Autonomous, Bangalore. Let us begin the session by invoking God's grace with a silent prayer. I now request Dr. Poppy Datta, Associate Professor, Department of Microbiology and PG Coordinator, to welcome the gathering.
Good evening, everyone. You have to be burning with an idea or a problem or a wrong that you want to right. If you're not passionate enough from the start, you will never stick it out. By Steve Jobs. With this quote, I welcome you all to today's talk on conversation around Sci-Art by Dr. Ipsa Jain. The event is organized by the Microbiological Society, Postgraduate Association of the Department of Microbiology, St. Joseph College, Autonomous, Bangalore. It is a privilege for me, on behalf of the staff and student of the Department of Microbiology, to cordially welcome our guest speaker for the day, Dr. Ipsa Jain. We are indeed grateful to you, ma'am, for accepting our invitation and your presence here. A very warm welcome, ma'am. With joy, we welcome our rector, Father Dr. Stewart De Silva, SJ, and a man who doesn't need any introduction and known for his wisdom, knowledge, and encouragement, our principal, Father Dr. Victor Lobo, SJ. We'd like to extend a warm welcome to our registrar, Dr. Melvin Colasso, Dr. Rabbi, the Vice Principal of the Postgraduate Section, and Dr. Jyoti Williams, Vice Principal of the Science Section. My warmest greeting to my colleagues from the Department of Microbiology for sparing a few hours of their valuable time to come and participate in this lecture. Without their cooperation, today's lecture would not have been possible. A hearty welcome to my dear students and staff from other departments. I welcome and thank you for participating in this lecture. As you listen to the talk on conversation around Sci-Art, I am sure your perspective about how you look at science will undergo a positive change. With this, once again, a warm welcome to all, and I thank each one of you for participating in this lecture. Have a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the warm welcome. I now invite Spurti, student of second year MSc Microbiology, to introduce the speaker for the session.
Good evening all, I am Spurti from 2nd MSc. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today, Dr. Ipsa Jain. Ipsa Jain is a science communicator, a former postdoctoral fellow at the Institute of Stem Cell Biology and Regenerative Medicine, Bengaluru. Dr. Ipsa describes herself as a scientist by training and an artist in spirit. She tries to communicate science through visual arts as a medium. Dr. Ipsa is a scientist by profession. She enrolled in PhD program in molecular oncology at the Indian Institute of Science, Bengaluru. Late into her PhD, ma'am realized that academia was not her space and thought about science communication and started off as a science illustrator. She initially only drew for joy and gradually started realizing how scientific illustration images can become pointers of new questions and force one to visualize. Currently, Dr. Ipsa owns a freelancing brand called Ipsa Wonders, through which she works with scientists, educators, book publishers, and institutes to develop visuals for peer communication, teaching tools, and thereby creating art inspired by science. Dr. Ipsa worked with French digital animator Renaud Chabrier and biologist Carsten Janke at the Institut Curie in Orsay, France. She also conducted a student-based course called Art of Being at our college, which mainly focused on how observation-based drawing could be used to learn a subject. She is a part of the Life of Science project, which focuses on contemporary research and stories of scientific pursuit intersecting with various societal barriers in India. Ipsa Jain, for sure, has set out an unusual path of taking science to people through art and illustration. Ma'am, we are really honored to have you here and eagerly waiting to hear from you. I request all the participants to be ready with a pen and a paper. Participants can post their questions in the chat box. Ma'am shall answer them post the talk. Ma'am, you can take over now.
Thank you. And good research. There are things that you knew that I don't really share in public all the time. Uh, and great to be here. Can I start sharing my screen? Is that a possibility for me now?
Yes, ma'am. I'll transfer the host rights to you.
Sure.
You are now host, ma'am.
All right. Oops, sorry. So first, thank you everyone for the warm welcome, for the invitation, and for your presence. I'm really excited about this talk. This is a talk that I developed somewhat recently, and I would like to share these ideas with you as well. So um, I will dive right into it. First, let's just establish that I know something about science and art. And to do that, I'm just going to share some of the work that I've done in the past to legitimize the fact that I'm somebody who's talking about science and art. So as Spurti mentioned, I'm somebody who trained to be a scientist for most of her life, but then at some point decided to exchange a pencil and a brush for a pipette, and that's where I am. I draw. I encourage people to draw, and I share ideas of science using drawing as a medium. And this talk will be part reading, so I will be reading out passages from books that relate to the images that I will be sharing with you today. I will also share some of my own work, and this talk will also be part activity where I'll encourage you to try something out and have some fun. Uh, so let me just, oops, I have to figure out how to, right. So this is some of the work that I've done in maybe past 2-3 years. And let's start. So curiosity. So as humans, we are curious. We want to try things. We want to get distracted and look like we're wasting our time. And maybe we're wasting our time right now. But sometimes you just want to see and notice what's going on around us. And the next thing, um, to observe is to look, to listen, to touch, to taste, to smell, attend to the details of the object, and build a perceptual experience related to that subject. And we gain a lot of useful evidence simply by noticing what's going on around us. There is a high concentration of nerves and finely tuned muscles in the palms and fingers. As a result, we can perform very intricate tasks with our hands. The process of material and knowledge production is a single hybrid affair in which the work of the head and the work of the hand form a complex whole. In the 19th century, the illustrated scientific book remained the gold standard of scientific communication. Detailed anatomical drawings, Euclidean diagrams, Hooke's micrographia, diagrams related to Newton's laws of motion, diagrams related to optics, uh, experimental setup for chemistry experiments, notations for compounds and chemicals, what is it? The geographical strata of Earth's history, floating microbes. All of these visuals enriched how scientific knowledge was exchanged in that century. And later in 19th century, we got a new medium, the photograph. So whether it was the sun's photograph like here, or it was an entirely new method of looking at things, the X-ray, cloud analyzers, electron micrographs. And since then, the way we have produced images which relate to science has become tremendous and enormous. We have now the power of computer for visual representation of large masses of data. And now we have a huge wave of creative image making, unprecedented in the history of scientific visualization. So So this brings me to the conclusion of this part that image creation and analysis has always been at the heart of scientific discovery and scientific communication. But with the build of instrumentation, the photographs, the microscopes, the electron micrographs, the telescopes, is the role of hand lost? So please ignore this email ID. So what we're going to try now is an activity. In the next slide, I have copied a passage from this book on growth and form. And what you have to try and do is read that paragraph and then draw what you think is being spoken about. Oops. Yeah. If you want, I can read it out loud. Right. We have, wherever we have a true cellular complex, an arrangement of cells in actual physical contact by means of a boundary film, we find this general principle in force. We must only bear in mind that for its perfect recognition, we must be able to view the object in planes at the right angles to the boundary walls. For instance, in any ordinary section of vegetable parenchyma, we recognize the appearance of froth, precisely resembling that which we can construct by imprisoning a mass of soap bubbles in a narrow vessel with flat sides of glass. In both cases, we see cell walls everywhere meeting by threes at an angle of 120 degrees, irrespective of the size of the individual cells, whose relative size, on the other hand, determines the curvature of partition walls. On the surface of a honeycomb, we have precisely the same conjunction between cell and cell of three boundary walls meeting at 120 degrees. In embryology, when we examine a segmenting egg of four or more segments, we find in like manner, in great majority of cases, that the same principle is still exemplified. The four segments do not meet in the common center, but each cell is in contact with two others, and only three common boundary walls meet at a normal angle of 120 degrees. A so-called polar furrow, the visible edge of a vertical partition wall, joins or separates the two triple contacts. So now you can take maybe a minute or two and just draw this out. And once you're done, we will, uh, uh, like we'll turn on our cameras and then share our drawings with each other. I'll stop sharing at that moment so that we can all see each other at that point of time.
Ma'am, sorry to interrupt, but can you admit some participants who are requesting to enter?
Sure. Right. Right. Done.
Thank you.
Just give me a second. Are you done? Shall we start sharing our drawings? Just make a quick squiggle, please. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. And now we can all come to the gallery view. Right, can you all please turn on your cameras and just hold up your drawings like so? If you don't want to show your face, it's totally fine. But we would like to see the drawings. Right. 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 I see only 2 people yet. Right. Am I to assume that more people do not want to share or would not like to share? Or, okay, great. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Let's just hold it up until like some more people share. People, we are short on time as well, so you have to do it now. Yes, I can see your drawings, Larissa, Madiha, Samson.
My video is not working, but I
Oh, no
can,
problem.
I'm holding it up. I hope you could see. I can't see it too.
I can't figure out this person's name. I have somebody whose drawings I can see, but cannot read the name. Okay, so, all right, we'll move on since time is a concern. But do share your drawings with each other if you have a way to do that later. But the big reveal of what was being described. Okay, so the image, oh, my pointer is not visible. I can not figure out. So basically the third drawing on the top row is what was being described. And these are the drawings that some other people drew in response to the same, same passage on some other day. And you'll realize that all these drawings are very different. And if more of you had shown your drawings, you would have realized that that's the case for you as well. So what this goes on to tell you is that how we interpret the same text is really personal, and it is dependent on our skill set, of course, but also our existing knowledge about that subject and our preconceived notions and inherent biases. So, which is why visuals are really important, especially when you're trying to think about the same thing at the same time. Oh, this is what it was. And so I'm hoping that a lot of you have seen this sketch. And in his notebook, Darwin begins with the phrase, I think, and ends not in a sentence, but in an illustration, this one, a tree that represents the key concepts, descent, diversity, and extinction, the great tree of life. So visual displays are distinctly involved in scientific communication and in the very construction of scientific facts. Observations are fundamental base of all research methods. The beautiful images in Maria Sibylla Meren's Metamorphosis Insectorium Surinamesium are the product of meticulous observations of the life cycles of insects. Most of our images were made from live or freshly preserved specimen. Merian show mottling eggs, caterpillars, feeding on larvae, and in order to create complex compositions containing variety of organisms accurately depicted, she relied on individual drawings made on smaller pieces of paper. And when an animal or plant was copied into a larger composition, she changed very little, trying to preserve the form, the color, and other details of how the two specimens interacted with each other. So seeing is in some respect an art and must be learned. So in his preface to Micrographia, Robert Hooke wrote that all that was required for studying nature was a sincere hand, a faithful eye to examine and to record the things themselves as they appear. In this passage, Hooke implies that with his words and the pictures, he merely acted as a microscope's assistant, recording whatever appeared through the lens of the instrument. Hooke built up these images from numerous observations made from multiple vantage points under varying lighting conditions and differing lens powers. Vision is not a mechanical recording of elements, but rather an apprehension of significant structural patterns. In this image, embryologist Saunders was slicing up early stage chick embryos and using a vital dye to color them. So here you see a cluster of sparsely spread throughout the otherwise very uniform tissue. Once he looked at this image, he thought, he believed, or he hypothesized that these are melanocytes, cells which will eventually go on to become melanocytes. Things changed when he started mapping these blue cells in developing embryo. After staining and fixing these tissue slices, he would trace the outer boundary of the tissue on a glass plate. Of how what is happening to these cells, to the shape of these outer boundaries. And then he realized that these cells are actually not melanocytes, but dying cells. This is what is making the form of the digit possible. So drawing was also a part of his method, which literally revealed what the thing actually was and disproved his original hypothesis of these cells being a melanocyte. So we need to show the real world, not lines and numbers, as we strive to create visual solutions for visual problems. So if you've read something about the X-ray crystallography method, you would know that the data we get there is in fact in form of coordinates and numbers and needs a level of interpretation. So the image here is a painting of myoglobin, the first protein structure ever solved by X-ray crystallography. This was created by Irving James for Scientific American for an article called The Three-Dimensional Structure of a Protein Molecule by John Kenru. He created this painting by first photographing the physical model and then by creating multiple volume sketches, which means that he tried to include the depth in these drawings. If what is in front, what is in back, he tried to account for those things. And he made very to occurring. He might distort the might change the parts of the protein molecule. He wanted not to draw how the protein looked, but to show it worked. He one of the special talents of protein, even is, but who would tell it what to show? Please feel free to any point if you feel like you don't get the point of this conversation, right? So in 1968, Waddington tells us that science is something more than a collection of conceptual or practical results. It's also an activity, and its practice involves a very important part, the exercise of the faculties of the insightful perception of natural phenomena and of imaginative creation of new concepts. This is the important part. So the image in left is a top view of Waddington's landscape where the path followed by a ball represents a developmental trajectory. The valley represents different alternative paths to depict different developmental potentials. For example, differentiation leading to different cell types. On right is depicted the underside of such a surface. So the pegs here represent the genes that act on that landscape by tugging on the intertwined webs of ropes, thereby changing the valleys and ridges on the surface above. So Waddington landscape does this really well. It stimulates visual thoughts. It makes you think. To paraphrase Waddington himself, his artful representation helps to loosen the joints of scientists' imagination, creating a space for associative play required to introduce new concepts in theory formation. The ball in Waddington's landscape remains the same over time as it rolls down the valley. It does not undergo any morphological transformations, which is incorrect because the cell is changing as it takes the path 1 versus path 2. Artist Gemma Anderson and collaborating scientists imagined overcoming this limitation by replacing the ball moving through landscape with a transformation series. So isomorphogenesis is a drawing method that Gemma Anderson developed, which explores the potential of representing morphologies as dynamic and formative process. So see these, changing forms that are going through alternative ridges and valleys, and in the end, though it starts at same point, the result you have at the end is very different as you go down each of those possible paths. So this resulting image reduces the level of abstraction of Waddington's landscape by explicitly showing the trajectory of morphological change through the valleys of the landscape. So this is a method she developed prior to this process, where she imagined the fate change as a change in the form of the drawings, right? So, oops, I am not able to go back. Just let me stop sharing. Try again. Yeah. So creativity, she writes, is the formation of new associations and concepts. It requires playful abandoning of preconceived notions. To be creative, we must let our minds wander. This, she said, hand drawing must not be allowed to disappear. And she said this not because of its use in scientific illustration, but because of its potential to form insights and understanding, to share this understanding, and to enhance creativity amongst artists and scientists alike. So let's try and be playful ourselves. I have an activity again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a word on the screen. Hopefully you didn't really get to see it very clearly. And I'll give you 1 minute to draw the first thing that comes to your mind when you look at that word. So the first word is warm, WARM, and I'm waiting 1 minute for you to draw in, and then again we'll share those drawings with each other. Please ignore the email ID at the bottom. I hope like that more number of you are trying to draw this time around. Okay, the time is up. Let's do this. We'll go to the next word as well and then share both the drawings together. So try to draw them in a way that both the drawings are around each other. The next one is glowing warm. All right. We are done with the second minute and I'm going to stop sharing my screen again. And we will show our drawings again. Right. I see sun. I see sun. I see the glowing warm. I see the glowing warm. Okay, I see tea. I can't see your drawing, Madhya. Okay, tea. Okay, fire. Insects. Right. Okay, Jennifer, I see fire. Your drawings is good, Jennifer.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Tea, some hot soup. So again, so this is very similar to what we tried in our first activities. So though the idea was heat, some of you drew the sun, some of you drew tea, which is a very Indian cultural thing, I think. And even though I gave a very vague description of the worm, I mean, I basically gave no description of the worm, but because of your experience or your knowledge of firefly, some of you drew firefly-like bug and some of you drew worm, the C. elegans worm, presumably, or some other worm. So try to think about, why to the same word we have different responses and how can you make use of that in your thinking process. Can you build relationships between how different people respond to similar text and the images they draw and the words they build around that word? Right. So now I'm going to share one of my own projects. Renaud Chabrier, my collaborator, said drawing enables the creation of images that are more abstract than photographs, but have more depth and are more accurate than schematics. Drawing can provide spatial as in related to the space visualizations that could never be photographed or easily schematized. So together we wanted to make some drawings of cargo being moved inside a cell. I'm hoping that because of your biology training, you understand what I'm talking about. But if somebody wants to interrupt and ask me something more about that, please let me know. Be happy to describe that more. So I started studying dynein, which is a molecular motor that varies carries cargo from the periphery of the cell towards the center of the cell. And I started drawing rough sketches and then some neat sketches to understand that how it looks from various angles. And then this motor really works as a dimer. So I wanted to look at the dimer. And then I came around across a lot of schematics. A lot of them were like the one on the left-hand side, which were drawn in simple circular shapes. And it informed me very little about how the front looked and how the back looked and how the whole, space, how would it look in space. And so for that, what I had to do was read a lot of literature, find a lot of data, um, and I looked at various bits and pieces to try and solve this puzzle. So I kind of arrived at a drawing it like that. I asked more questions. I looked through data. So this was a very iterative process, much like science, and again, with more data, more drawings, more iterations, more questions. So you see, drawing is used as a process of thinking at this point of time. And this is the final model that I could draw based on the information available. And then what this drawing does really is not just tell you what's known, but it also highlights what's not known. So there were points of doubt that I was able to identify by drawing the molecule in its entire composition from the front view and the back view. And once I knew something about the form, I want to understand how it works. So it works on this. Somebody has a question? Please interrupt. Okay, so it works on this, let's say, rope called the microtubule. So I wanted to understand how this turbo works and how is it carrying this big cargo, around it. So again, then I went back to the data we had, and there was a lot of data which talked about that how it makes like a drunkard walk. So the step size that it can take can be either from 8 nanometer to 32 nanometer, or between the two dimers, the one dimer could walk any number of steps. It could walk 32, and the second one could walk 8 nanometer. So the literature described this molecule's walk as the drunkard walk, really. And so I tried to plot these multiple permutations and combinations on the graph side of the drawing that you see. And then I realized that if we are trying to do it that randomly, something can go wrong. And while I was working on this, we got some other model, like some other data came up, and we had some more understanding of how the work would start. So once I knew what my starting point was, I had more possibilities of exploring these potentials. And so what I did was I drew all these multiple possibilities, and I'll just show you that in a sec. So what I'm going to do now is just play these very quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we will not really go into what these possibilities were, but like if you look at these 4 possibilities, you will immediately appreciate certain things. One is that in equal number of steps, in some possibilities, the molecule went much forward. If you want to look at it again, right? So here it took the largest, it covered the largest possible distance, and here it covered the smallest possible distance. So I could figure out that these certain walks would actually have different speeds and will cover different distances. And then the other thing that I figured out was that in some walks, the two motors, the participants in the dimer, would be very close to each other, whereas in some others, like if you see the bottom one here, they'll be quite far apart from each other, which means the molecule has to stretch and accommodate this distance between them. And that then opened up a new question as to how that is happening. And this is a question that we still don't know the answer to. So so during this entire process, we were not only able to summarize all the data that's available about how this molecule looks and how this molecule looks while it works, but we also came up with a list of new questions that were now open for scientists to explore and figure out. And we also, with our drawings, able to give them certain possibilities. So all these drawings essentially become hypotheses for you to work on. Then you can design your experiments to figure out which of these possibilities actually work. um, so what is really useful about drawing is that it is free from pragmatic constraints, and those pragmatic constraints are those of experimental feasibility. So like in the Waddington's experiment, I shared that the drawings related to the Waddington's landscape, I shared that how drawing opens up the possibility of creative imagination, and that is taking away our constraints from whether we have that experimental machine, whether we know how to ask a question, whether we know how to design that kind of experiment. So it takes away all those constraints, and just with play and imagination, we can arrive at new possibilities which wouldn't come up otherwise, right? Hopefully I'm able to convince you. If you're not convinced, we can talk about it. Um, Right. So now we're going to try that exercise ourselves. I'm going to show you an image, and I'll give you maybe 2 minutes for this. So imagine that image to be time 0. And now what you have to do is define a time 1, which can be 1 minute, which can be infinity, which can be 5 minutes, which can be 1 hour, 1 day, whatever is the time scale you decide, that's up to you. But then imagine what's happening to that. Like, for example, when we draw amoeba moving or a bacteria moving, we, change the shape of the bacteria or change its position or something like that. So imagine that composition, and movement is just one example. Whatever else can happen to it. So just think of something that's happening to this and then draw. If you want me to articulate the activity better, you can tell me.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Can you explain once more what we are supposed to do?
So imagine that this is the image that you're looking at time point 0. Imagine a time point t, which can be at any gap. It can be 1 second after time is equal to 0, or it can be 1 day after time is equal to 0. And something has changed about this, whatever is there in the image. I'm not going to tell you what's there in the image. So you decipher for yourself what you think is there in the image and what will change and change. So draw something which shows a change in state, in or any kind of state within this subject here.
Okay, ma'am.
I'm counting your 2 minutes. All right, one more minute. Are we ready? Are we ready? I'm stopping.
Yes, ma'am.
Share. And you know what to do. I can see what happened. Nice. Sneha's drawing is interesting. Anisha Ghosh draws really well. Something's, is this funny? Oh no, it's an insect inside. I got it.
Yeah, I tried drawing a cicada, ma'am. Didn't work out.
No, I like understood. I'm sorry. Okay,
That's
cool.
fine, ma'am.
Yeah. Cool. Interesting. This drawing is, Spooty's drawing is very interesting. It's like emerging out of the shell. So we see the emergence. In some cases, we see movement, and in some cases, we see complete metamorphosis inside the shell, and sometimes it's emergent. So all of these things then become questions for you to answer to figure out whether you know what really is happening. I mean, of course, this is a bug, so it's really easy to observe. But if you take that for any scientific process, you have access to any image that comes from science, and just you look at that, and then imagine something that's happening to it, even if it's fantastical. You know, it creates a room for possibilities and thinking about that subject differently and exploring new ideas which otherwise you wouldn't have access to. Right. Yeah. So hypothesis worth pursuing may be realized verbally or visually. I asked science students and law students to draw cells from memory, and here are some of these representative drawings. So the one on the left are by science students, and one on the right are by some friends of mine. And what you realize is that all of these images are these flat cross-sectional images of a cell. And that's certainly not how a cell really is or looks or be, it is in fact a 3D entity. So that's the idea I wanted to communicate. So I created some zines and I devised this visual metaphor. So what I did here was I took a piece of orange, a very familiar object, and then I took tetrahymena, an unfamiliar cell, and then I sliced them. So on one side you see the orange, and on one side you see the tetrahymena. So you look at a cross section of an orange, you look at a cross section of a tetrahymena. And then I was fortunate that I got to share this with a lot of science students, scientists, and even people beyond science, like what can be called the public. And what was interesting was that a lot of them observed the same thing. So in these serial sections, they could observe that the distribution of organelles was different, the size was different, and they could even identify relationships, like they could identify that the mitochondria is always towards the periphery, it's closer to the cilia. And what was interesting that even people who are not trained in sciences, they were able to build these relationships, except that it was devoid of the terms we use. They did not maybe know that it is mitochondria, but they could see that relationship. So it is possible to, build perception with imagery you use. So I want to say we see, but we do not see. We use our eyes, but our gaze is glancing. Frivolously consider its object. We see the signs, but not their meanings. We are not blinded, but we have blinders. So with their scientific argument, two gentlemen turned X-ray diffraction photographs of DNA into possible stereochemical realization. And the model further applies to any DNA molecule. It's not just about the piece of DNA which was used to take this photograph, but this model is now applicable to DNA of all life forms that are out there. And each of its realizations stands true for those rest. So this molecule's structure suggests a scheme of replication. Now, this is a shift from description to explanation. And this image is building layers of meaning on top of it. Conceptually, it was easy to visualize how a single chain could be the template uh, for synthesis of a chain with a complementary sequence. So while no one would claim that images are integral to all scientific thinking, hopefully, I've convinced you that scientific thinking, sometimes of the highest order, occurs in absence of words. So with this, okay, this I would like to thank you for your attention and for your participation. These are some of the references if you would like to look them up later and read more about science and art. And I am easily accessible on my social media. You can find me as Ipsa Wonders. I also have a website. And I want to thank Minaj, my postdoctoral, the PI at the postdoctoral lab, and the lab members, and Karsten Junke and Reno Shabrier, with whom I did work on Dynein, and other collaborators, and all the people who have existed before and at my time and will come later uh, with their work on art and science. So thank you again. Happy to take questions and comments.
Thank you, Dr. Ipsa, for that wonderful session on conversations around sci-art. We learned how visual problems require visual solutions, and that drawing is theorizing, looking, understanding, predicting, asking questions, amongst various other insights that piqued our interest. We will now proceed with the Q&A session. This is a reminder for all the participants to type in any questions that they may have regarding the session in the chat box, and Dr. Ipsa will answer them. So the first question is from Larissa Gomes. She asks, in scientific illustration, does one have to leave subjectivity out of their drawing and be only objective while drawing?
So the first thing you have to know as to what is the purpose of that drawing. So if that purpose of the drawing is for communication, you might have to actually incorporate some amount of creative freedom and not show things as they are. Like we discussed in Arvind Guy's drawing of the myoglobin, often you have to take some liberty because clarity is more important than reality. If your clarity is presented in a way that it is not clear to the audience that it is intended for, it doesn't help. But we still have to say as close to reality as possible. So, but that is to do with more, towards the idea of scientific illustration. But if you think about science art, that doesn't have that restriction. Like we tried just now, we tried looking at that image of a bug and then imagining what's happening. So that is a process where you have all the liberties to imagine and think. And I think in scientific process, it's this activity of imagining and thinking where drawing has far more value than perfect scientific illustration. It's important in terms of documentation, representation, and communication. But to sharpen your thinking process is where you need creative freedom. So using those liberties to try. Yeah. Anyone has other questions? Comments about the talk? If you didn't understand something, you didn't like something, I am open to feedback of any kind. Spooty asks,
Yes,
is there software or apps? Spooty, my recommendation would be that you start with pencil drawing, because it's not about the app, or it's not about the tool. It's about knowing what to draw and how to draw. Once you know that how to do that on a pen or paper scenario, then it's quite easy to translate on whatever apps you use. But of course, because our lives work with the digital media, it's useful to learn. So you can learn something like Adobe Illustrator or Procreate or whatever you use. So app is not a limitation to scientific illustration. So that is, I would say, more as a way, it's more of a medium. But scientific illustration is also about thinking and knowing what to show, what not to show. And that's something that you will learn with time, with practice. Thank you, Beatrice. I mean, I guess that's my X factor, that my talks are different from other science talks because my work is different from other scientists. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, please.
Yeah. So, doing a PhD, how helpful has it been for you to, for this transition from a scientist to an illustrator? And would doing a PhD be very advantageous if one of our students want to do this in future? Would doing a PhD, would you suggest them to do a PhD and go ahead with this, or is it not? Is it not necessary if they want to translate
Yeah,
into an illustrator?
right. So for me personally, I think PhD was very useful in being able to do what I do now, especially because I personally did not have any research experience prior to that. I mean, I came from a college phase where uh, research was very minimal. So I think it's the process of research, understanding the process of research and having that understanding of how to read a scientific paper, how to analyze it. So all of that has been very useful to do what I do now. So if you are able to develop some similar these skill sets outside of a PhD, then surely you can go for it. And if you want to be science illustrator, there are several ways to go about it. So one is that you can take a professional course, which are there very few across the world in medical illustrations or scientific illustrations. The other thing you can do is pursue a science degree and then pursue a degree in illustration and or art, and then try to combine the two. And other is I did not personally take any training in art, and um, that hasn't necessarily been an hindrance, though I personally would like it. So I think all of these are possible paths, and you just have to figure out what's the one that works for you. The other thing that PhD certainly helps you with in more very pragmatic constraints, that just because I have a PhD, like the scientists particularly feel comfortable in talking to me because they feel like that when they talk to me, I will understand what they're saying, which is really the case. So in that sense, it helps a lot. Like A, I'm able to understand them, and that B, that helps build that trust. Larissa asks, uh, how does one avoid plagiarism in scientific illustration? Well, the so you have to do two things when you're making a drawing. First thing is you have to know why you are making that drawing and for whom you are making that drawing. So that intention has to be very clear. And if that intention is clear, and then you have to do the second point is that you have to do like even for writing, if you are doing research and you're looking at multiple sources, um, even if you are heavily influenced by one particular piece of research, without a doubt what's happening is that you have imbibed things from other pieces that you read, and that's is what is going into the writing. And the same will also happen for drawing. If you have read up or you have looked at multiple drawings and then you're trying to draw, you will inherently be able to avoid plagiarism. But for example, if I have to draw an eye, and how if you have to draw an eye, the way we interpret it will be very different. And without a doubt, even in the way we draw our lines, it'll just be different from each other. So because drawing is such a subjective activity where I am bringing my mind and my hand there is bound to be variation. But if you're exactly just copying from a textbook or something, that's not considered nice. If you are somebody who's, as a beginner, copying as a way to learn and way to acquire skills, like even in art schools, initial training is to look at the work of the masters and then copy them, and that's a very legitimate way of learning. To so that in that sense, it's absolutely fine if you look at somebody else's work and you draw, but after a point of time when you're making independent work, you have to create your own work, use your own research, use your own style. So like when I was talking about Maria Sibylla's work, so what she used to do was individual drawings of several things and then put that together. So if you develop a process like that, you will end up avoiding plagiarism no matter how. Yeah. Do you have to be naturally gifted in art to pursue scientific illustration? Soumya asks. Soumya, honestly, I don't think I'm naturally gifted in art. For me, it has come from practice. So if it's something that interests you, I think you can practice and try to build that skill. But what you need to develop also is not just the skill, but also an understanding of, again, why you're drawing what you're drawing and what does it mean and what will it do for the audience. So those questions are far more important than the skill set. I mean, that skill set will eventually build with time. Yeah.
The
Can
next,
I ask you a question, please? So now, when you publish your work, like in your PhD or postdoc, we publish our research work, right? So when we publish work, can we use this illustration, or it has to be, we need to use different softwares? For,
So I'm not sure I understand your question very clearly.
so suppose I did a particular research during my PhD, and I want to publish my data. So the data which I'm publishing, can I use illustrations in the form of drawings, or do I need to have those, the graph should be in Origin or Excel or,
Right. So data certainly needs to be in that standard format because it's part of good practices, because it should be that somebody should be easily able to verify what you have done. But for example, if you're building schematics or if you're trying to show hypothesis, you can use drawing. If I'm not wrong, this cancer biology guy whose name I should remember, but I don't. He recently, some last year, I think, uh, published a paper where all the images, not the hypothesis images, all the schematics were actually hand drawings and not done in an app or anything like that. It was essentially scans of drawings that they did in their notebooks. And those can be hand drawn, but data should be in the appropriate format, because I mean, data is like, you have to think about reproducibility, not play, data fudging, and all of those concerns are there, which are so it's important to follow a standardized format for that. Yeah.
Thank you, Isha.
Yeah.
the next question comes from Soumya. Do you have to be naturally gifted in art to pursue scientific illustration?
I thought I just answered that when I told that I'm not gifted in art myself, and I think you can develop that skill. How is this communication of science in art in India? Are you the only one so far? No, I have several peers. Some of the ones that come to my mind immediately, my friend Arya Manna, he is a cartoonist and he draws a lot on history of science. Then another friend called Disha Chauhan, she also makes some work. Then there are artists like Dhara Malhotra, Shashank. I actually this year I did a series on science art in India with the Life of Sciences, so you can look up a lot of names there. I've interviewed several of them and I've had conversations. So if you just go to the Life of Science website, you will find them there, and You can learn more about them and their work and what they think about science art. Do you personally take up commission work which are strictly time bound, or would you rather decline? I mean, as a freelancer, I also need to earn money. So most of my money comes from commission work. So I do say yes, but now because I also have a full-time job, I decide, which ones I would like to do more, and then I have some freedom. But before I had a job and did not have that kind of stability, I did say yes to most commission work. And uh, yeah, because bread is also a concern. Earning bread is also a concern in life. Yeah. Our son, sorry.
Yeah, there was a question from Ritika. What is the process one has to go through to become a certified scientific illustrator?
Certified scientific illustrator happens only if you have done a proper course from one of the good schools which are in UK, US, and Australia. There are some courses there which are basically like BScs or MScs in scientific visualization or medical illustration. And once you are done with them is when you become a certified illustrator. I'm not a certified illustrator. I don't, in India, we don't have that system of certification because we don't have that many people doing this yet. Yeah. It's also a question from Saeed. Are scientists across looking for employing scientific illustrator? Saeed, full-time jobs for scientific illustrators are not a possibility in India right now, and it's mainly because of how money comes to scientists. While a lot of elite scientific institutes employ writers to write about their work and share with news channels and others, like other science communication jobs, but there are no specific jobs for science. um, Science, there are no specific jobs for scientific illustrators, but they do engage with them. So on a case by case, on a project by project basis, we work with them. Oh, I will, Beatrice, that's not a life aim that I have currently, but if I change my mind, you'll get to know, I suppose. Yeah, I don't even know what one needs to become a person who can give a certificate. Huh. Yeah, welcome, Saeed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. With that, I think we have come to the end of the Q&A session. Thank you, participants, for posing your questions, and thank you, Dr. Ipsa, for answering all of them patiently.
Oh.
And ma'am, I request you to hand over the host rights to
Yes.
Larissa back again. Thank you so much.
Right.
Yeah. I now invite Spurti to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Calrida. Gratitude is not only the greatest of virtues, but the parent of all others. Hence, we must find time to stop and thank the people who make a difference in our lives. I deem it a great honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks for today's event. Let me first start by giving glory to the Almighty God for making today's event a resounding success. I would like to extend my heartiest thanks to our guest speaker, Dr. Ipsa Jain, for taking time out of her busy schedule and introducing all of us to different aspects on scientific illustration. Thank you, ma'am. I'm grateful to Father Dr. Victor Lobo, Principal, St. Joseph's College, for helping us in organizing such insightful events. I thank our registrar, Dr. Melvin Colasso, and Vice Principal, Dr. Rabai, for their constant support. My heartfelt thanks to Dr. Beatrice Sequeira, Head of Microbiology Department, for constantly assisting and encouraging all of us. I thank our PG coordinator, Dr. Poppy Datta, for her unstinted support. We are grateful to all the faculty members of the Microbiology Department for their valuable contribution, guidance, and encouragement in all our efforts. I thank our MC, Ms. Calrida Puel de Souza, for seamlessly facilitating the entire session. I would be remiss if I did not thank our student coordinators. I thank Larissa Gomes for her tireless efforts for the backdrop and organization. I thank Jennifer and Anusha for putting in their efforts in designing the poster, Shivani and Manisha for coordinating the Q&A session, Samson for uploading the taped event on our YouTube channel, Aisha and Sanshal for documenting the events. I owe special gratitude to all the other members of the Microbiological Society, without whom this feat would not be possible to achieve. Lastly, I thank all the students for actively taking part in the session and making this event a memorable success. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you,
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Thank you, Spurti. We have now come to the end of the interactive talk on conversations around SciArt. We sincerely hope you all enjoyed the session and have something meaningful to take away from the talk.